Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this SICC webinar, Executive Loneliness, the Unspoken Workplace Isolation. You know, we human beings have an extraordinary ability to put up barriers that should not exist, but do. You know, whether it's taboo about sexual orientation or mental illness, the stigmas are real. And if the pandemic has shown us anything, it's shown us how we should really focus on what is important. Our businesses, our cash flow, our physical health, but also our mental health. They always say that it's lonely at the top. And of course it can be, because at the end of the day, the senior executive of a business carries the can for what everybody else in the team does or doesn't do or should do and don't do. And I'm delighted that we've got an opportunity to talk about this. We've been talking throughout the last few months about the importance of good mental health. I was just saying to our guest speaker earlier this morning that I've been here 35 years. And in that time, I have seen the level of mental illness dramatically increase across the working population. Why has that happened? It can happen for all sorts of reasons. We put stress on ourselves. We decide that we have to put in work all the hours that God sends. We decide we have to respond to every email and every message as soon as we receive it. Or we have the misfortune for working for toxic bosses. And sadly, there are too many of them in businesses, large and small. That includes multinationals and SMEs and startups. So this is a topic that really is important and underscores why we should spend time discussing it and thinking about it and then acting in our best interests. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us focus on the important issues in life and then take action. Don't brush things under the carpet. Today we've got a great speaker, someone who has had the confidence, the courage to talk about his own challenges with mental health issues and executive loneliness. So there's nobody better than Nick Jonsson to come and share his perspectives, to explain this in more detail for us, and to share with us what are some of the key coping mechanisms. Before I ask Nick to speak with us, I've just a couple of housekeeping issues. As always, and a big thank you to John Bittleston for, as usual, taking action. The Q&A function is at the bottom of your screens at any time during Nick's presentation. Key in your questions. I will be back after his presentation to moderate the Q&A. I also need your help on a different issue, but related to good mental health and connectivity. So my team and I are undertaking an experiment with the wonderful Nobi platform to see whether or not you like it and whether or not it really can be a proxy for that networking that we would all achieve if we were in a hotel function room right now. So can I please encourage you to register your account, take yourself through that process, and then let me and my team know whether you like it, whether you think it's too much hassle, whether you want us to continue with it or not. We've done it a couple of sessions, couple of webinars, and what has been astonishing, ladies and gentlemen, is the extraordinary silence. In other words, no sound, no picture from you. So please, we've put good money into this as an experiment. Doesn't cost you anything, but please do try it out and let us know whether you like it or not. If you like it, we'll continue with it. If you don't, we'll drop it. Thank you so much. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Victor, and welcome everybody. So yes, my name is Nick Jonsson. and I'm going to talk to you today about the book I'm writing on executive loneliness. Indeed, as an expat myself, having lived and worked in Asia for 20 years, I've had my own challenges. Sometimes it's been a small little roller coaster journey, and sometimes I had some crashes. For many years, I kept these for myself until I had a crash that was so bad that I didn't think I would survive it. That's when I started to look into this topic, and I started to research it and ask people around me if they also had been suffering. Perhaps they had just kept it secret and silent. I even did a survey where we questioned executives in Singapore about their mental health, and I was quite shocked with the findings. I've also interviewed around 50 senior executives as a part of my book that I'm hoping to release by end of this year. I'm going to share with you the findings of this survey and also some insight into the interviews that I made. Along this journey now of writing this book in the last year, I've had more than 25 media exposures, 3 radio interviews, and there's been a big interest in the topic, something that I didn't know before I opened this topic. People are thanking me for looking into it and for speaking openly about it, a topic indeed that is so full with stigma. One groundbreaking media piece we had was in February this year, when the Business Times wrote an article called "Successful but Lonely at the Top." This is a 4-page feature in the Business Times weekend edition, where they interviewed me and also some other senior executives here in Singapore, where we were sharing our journeys and our ups and downs. And later on, the next month, we also had a full page in the Straits Times during the weekend. These media exposures have been followed up with a lot of phone calls. A lot of people are thanking me and the people who opened up and shared their stories openly inside these media articles. It seems like this was something that was waiting to happen. And indeed, as Victor rightly said, now during the pandemic is the right time to really tackle this head on. We have one chance to have a go at this, to release the stigma surrounding mental health, because as I will tell you today, it can be life-saving. Year 2018, I had a crash myself. I had a big anxious and mental breakdown, and I didn't think I would survive. I made some choices that year that saved my life, and I'm going to share these choices with you today. Sadly, a friend and colleague of mine did different choices, and he is not with us today. There's some things we can learn between the differences in our responses to protect ourselves, but also to look out for our friends, colleagues, and other loved ones, especially during these pandemic times when we know that so many are suffering, but perhaps they are putting on a poker face because they want to show that they're strong, they want to show that they're doing well in their job, but inside them, they're burning. So this is what I'm going to share with you today. And especially, I hope that after today, we all feel a little bit better about this topic and more open to talk about it. So let me take you back to the year 2008. I'm living and working as an expat in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Everything was going well. I lived there with my ex-wife, and I had a good career going for myself. One day I was called in to my boss office, and he was telling me that I was to be laid off. I was in complete shock. This was the first major setback in my life. I had graduated with good grades from a university, and I had a good career progression with regular promotions. And I was, rather than expecting to be terminated, expecting perhaps my next promotion. The managing director role was next up for me. I didn't get it. Instead, I found myself inside a foreign country, Vietnam, without a job. And as with that, of course, many times comes also the car, the medical insurance, everything else. And I went home that evening to tell my ex-wife what had happened. And just when I told her the news, she also said that she had news to share. And just like out of a movie, she said that she was pregnant. I went in a complete shock, and I felt, how can I, as a father, a new father, take care of a family when I don't have a job, I don't have an income? And at this stage, already I was caring a lot about what other people were thinking about me. So I had on social media, the LinkedIn and everything else was already looking good, and I was making sure that everyone in my family and back home in Sweden and other people would look at me as a successful, high-achieving executive. But how could I put on a good show now when I suddenly didn't have a job? So for a few months, I went through a very, very challenging time, and I jumped from some small assignments to another until I landed a new job, a great, fantastic job also in Vietnam, because I didn't want to go back to Sweden to show people that I failed, that I lost a job. So I remained in Ho Chi Minh City, got a new job, worked for them for a few years until the point when they wanted to promote me to a bigger market. And a much bigger market for them was Indonesia. So at this stage, my son was now 5 years old. We moved over to Jakarta. And just as we had settled down in Jakarta and found a house we moved into, and my son had started his new school, I was called into my new boss in this company, and he said, the company has been sold. 300 of us, including you, need to go. So here I was for the second time in a new country, new city, and in another company, and I was let go again. This was, again, a complete shock to me. Just when I had built up my confidence, I was starting to get over the shock from the first collapse. Here I was again, and I was ill prepared. At this stage, I didn't even have an updated CV, something that I've heard from many people now, also during the pandemic, that been laid off. The first thing they're asking, how can I tackle the job market? I don't have a CV. That was me back then. I didn't know where to turn. And I didn't know many people in Indonesia. I didn't speak the language. But again, my natural response was that I should stand alone on this. I cannot go back to Sweden. I cannot let people know that I lost my job. I was so shy about what had happened. And as I was in this panic mode and couldn't really think clear, I also felt the burden of having my ex-wife and my son around me, because how can I pay for the school without having an income and so on. That actually asked my ex-wife and son, who was then 5 years old, to move back to Sweden, where at least my son could go to school and they could deal with their situation on their own. So here I was then completely by myself in a new city without a job, looking around for a new assignment. I got a new job, a really great one, with a company I had worked for earlier as a general manager, and I had a big package, and it was perhaps my dream job, but maybe I got the job a little bit too early. I had not recovered from the shock, and there I was alone also without my family. Suddenly I'm in a job with big pressure, and I had not recovered. I didn't talk to anybody about what had happened. I didn't reach out to any counselor, no therapist. In fact, there was no one, not even my family, knew that I was hurting. No one could really understand why I had suddenly sent my ex-wife and son back. And I didn't probably know myself, because I was in a deep depression and having anxiety attacks. So in my new job, I was walking around and delivering good, but I was always anxious, worried that perhaps someone will stab me in the back, someone will get me. Or I was just thinking, when is the day when I'm going to be called into the office again of my new boss here and be terminated yet another time? So this went on for about 1 year, and I kept it again inside me rather than calling up my boss to have an open talk about it. We had performance reviews, and yes, I delivered on targets, or even better, and everything looked great. But I was just sure that something will happen. Something, just like my previous company, maybe I'm doing too good, the company will be sold, or something will happen, so I lose the job. And this went to the point where I actually wrote my resignation, and I went in and resigned, because I thought it's better that I terminate myself rather than being terminated yet another time, because I just couldn't face that. So here I finally was then by myself again in Jakarta, now without the job on my own account, not really sure what to do, trying to find myself and starting to jump from assignment to assignment, and I wasn't feeling very well. I perhaps exercised a little bit too much. I started to also perhaps drink a little bit too much. I went to the bar after working hours to try to connect with some people, and perhaps you don't form the strongest and best relationships in a bar, but that was all I had. And that started the downward spiral. And I started to feel more and more lonely, more disconnected with everyone. Jumped from assignment to assignment until year 2018, when EGN relocated me to Singapore, and I arrived to take over the company here. I was not well, I didn't speak to many about it, but at least I had a job. I saw a future and I wanted to do really well. I worked extremely hard to make sure the business was thriving, as I always had. I was a high achiever, but again, now in another country and not knowing any people, I didn't have any friends, no one to really speak with, not to have deep conversation. I had always a lot of connections. Because right in EGN, I had a network of people all around me, but I didn't feel connected with them. Here is a photo of me in 2018 after 3 months in Singapore. Yes, the food is fantastic here and we have great restaurants, and I put on 20 kilo in a few months. But it's not from the food. It is the lost my appetite for what I love most in life, exercising. I stopped my exercising routine. I kept up with a bad habit I picked up in Jakarta to go to the bar. And when I moved to Singapore, I was going for too many drinks after work, and drinking relaxed me after work. I felt that I deserved it. And then, of course, the next morning I woke up feeling bad again, or even worse. And this just went from bad to worse until April 2018, when I can recall lying in bed and really thinking what is going on. And I remember having heart rush and really having anxious attack coming in and out from me. Despite now my job doing well, I just didn't feel any connections inside me, not the connection with other people. And here is a photo of my left foot in May 2018. I went to the doctor and asked them, what is it? They x-rayed it and everything else. They said they couldn't find anything wrong with it. It was only later on when I spoke to a psychologist and therapist who told me that this is a psychosomatic disorder. It's basically a mental illness, that the body is so bad and it can express itself in a way like this. So that was the state of my mental health at this stage. And I can remember also looking at this foot and lying there in the bed with a heart rushing. And I really was sure that I couldn't fall any lower in my life. And that's when I wrote my testament and my will. I wanted to make sure that I did the right thing. I sorted out all the paperwork, because should I pass away, then at least my son should be able to get some money. I signed up for life insurance and all the other things that I possibly could, so that I shouldn't leave more mess behind me than cause damage that I already have done to other people's life, and especially thinking about my ex-wife and my son. So that's basically the state I was in. And that's when suddenly, out of the blue, things started to turn around for me. I will later on share with you today what was the episode and what was it that made a turnaround. But just as I started my recovery and coming back to life again, something happened. My friend and colleague, Simon, committed suicide. We had no idea about that he was not feeling well. He just came back from Mount Everest Base Camp, where he had climbed, which was one of his dreams in life. He had a girlfriend he really loved, and I saw some pictures and posts of him just before this happened on his Facebook that said he'd never been happier in his life. I spoke with his family and his brother after the episode and many of his friends, and we were all left answering what happened to Simon. We just didn't know. Even some of the people who were closest with him had no idea. So that is a terrible episode that happened because no one knew, and he didn't speak to anybody about how he was feeling. And that's when I realized that this could have been me. Despite that, when I lie there in my bed with that swollen foot and my heart rushing, I didn't feel suicidal. I haven't reached the stage then where I was thinking about killing myself. I just looked at my health, thinking that I'm not going to survive this. I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't be much further before I also started to give up on life and have suicidal thoughts. It's a very fine line there that saved my life. And that's when I decided to start speaking up about what had happened to me. Instead of getting sad and depressed over what happened to Simon, I quickly arranged with his brother, who was very close with him. I said, I need to take action here. Will you give me the permission to speak about what happened to Simon, so that we can help other people and help to prevent this, so that we can remove the stigma around talking about suicide and mental health? And his brother said to me, Nick, scream it loud. Simon will be very proud of you. And that's what I did. I then signed up for a race, a triathlon, Ironman Sweden, And it's an extreme triathlon where you basically have to first swim 3.8 kilometer in the ocean, then you have to cycle 180 kilometer, and you have to run a marathon at the end of it. So here I was, just slowly recovering, starting to lose the weight and exercising and coming back to life. And I signed up for this race, and I committed 1 year of training. But more importantly, I signed up for SOS, the Samaritans in Singapore, the suicide prevention agency, to become a volunteer. And I launched a campaign, Race to an End to Executive Loneliness. And we have so far donated money and time to this beautiful organization, which has this 24-hour hotline where people can call if they feel lonely and they have suicidal thoughts, and there's always someone there to talk to about it. And on that note, I should say, until the end of last year, it was criminal to talk about suicide attempts in Singapore. It's now decriminalized, and therefore this organization can flourish, and we can have these healthy conversations about suicide, which is of course something that is a terrible act and something that we can prevent if we just speak openly about it. So this, when I started then work on this campaign, immediately I received, as you can see perhaps there, so many comments and views on LinkedIn. And remember, this is a sensitive topic, so most people wouldn't comment openly about it. But I also received hundreds of emails and phone calls and messages from people to thank me for starting this campaign. And that's when I decided this is a huge topic, and I decided to write a book about it. I was then invited to radio, and they asked me, what is loneliness? And that's my first question to you today. Perhaps you can help me to write in the chat there in the Q&A, what is loneliness? What does it mean to you? And I would love to hear from you, because that was the first question that I received when I was on one of the radio interviews. I will share with you what my answer was as you're writing in. One of the things I said then, well, if we talk about executive loneliness, it's lonely at the top. The reason I said that is that I'm working with 300 regional directors, basically people who are very busy, senior executives. And I said, if you're based in Singapore as a regional director, you tend to report to a CEO or an owner in another country, in another continent. And the team that are reporting to you, many of them are perhaps country manager based in other countries in Asia. So there's no one really there at your level, no one who you can have the straight conversation with. And that can be very lonely, because if you don't have anyone inside the organization who you can speak with, then you will end up very lonely at the end of the day. But the more I dug into this conversation and the deeper I went into the topic, I realized that it's not only lonely at the top, it can be lonely anywhere in an organization, because much of the talk we have inside the company tend not to be about the honesty and the challenges we are going through, but perhaps we are showing that how good we are, and we're trying to, in the rat race, to perform better and better. We're trying to impress rather than being vulnerable and open and honest. That's at least what I started to see when I looked into this. And of course, and to answer also what is loneliness. And in my case, loneliness didn't mean that I was alone. I could be in a room full of people, even my family, but I didn't feel a connection because I wasn't feeling well inside me. Therefore, I couldn't connect with them. The same people, if I see I'm together with them in the room now, I feel the connection, I feel the warmth. So that's a completely different feeling. And that is at least the best way I can explain what loneliness is, because that's how I experienced it firsthand. And I see here it's sentence broken. Loneliness is talking to oneself even when there are dear or near ones surrounded. Exactly. That is what I'm talking about. Even that you're surrounded by people, you cannot feel the connection with them. You cannot even know what they're feeling. They're trying to be nice to you, they love you, but you cannot feel that. That is what is so difficult with loneliness. And then I started to look into this topic further, and I started to research it. And what I found out was that globally, according to WHO, 300 million people are suffering from depression. So that's 5% of all people. So I questioned then, what about in Singapore? Because when so many people reached out to me when I opened this topic, I figured maybe that this is more maybe in Singapore. So I did a survey through my organization at EGN, where we reach a lot of people, and I was shocked with the findings that showed that 30% of the surveyed executives currently are or have suffered from depression. That means that it's 6 times higher than the global average. And the more I research this topic, the more people I speak with, I'm not surprised. This is what is happening. Singapore is an expat hub where we all are high achievers. We are trying to work hard. And as I research this topic also, I found out that immigrants are always hungry, they're working harder. But you know, we are so far away from our families, many of us, that we're creating this culture, and it's a constant battle to work harder and harder. And as you feel more disconnected from yourself by working too much, you also with your family. Then the next question I looked into was in regards to the stigma. So 75% of the question people said that they those who need help don't seek help due to stigma. So it means that if they're suffering, they wouldn't go and see someone. They'd be scared to go and see a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist or a doctor saying that they have a mental health issue. In contrast, if someone has a broken foot, we don't have any stigma to go and see the doctor. But if something is not right with our mental health, then we still have this stigma. And even I had that. And that is why I found myself in this situation so many times, because I just didn't seek help. I didn't want to, because I was worried what people would think about me, people would judge me. The next challenging point here is that 82% of the Singapore-based executives find it difficult to talk about executive loneliness, depression, and so on in their company. This quite surprised me. We have so many of the big global organizations who have the support structure in place. You have your review meetings, you have your mentoring, your coaching internally in the company. But when you really ask them, will they talk about what is happening? No, they won't. They won't open up about it. 82% won't do that. And when I ask them some more questions about it, it's because they are worried that people will find out about this and they think it's going to hinder their career progression in the company. So they rather keep this secret and silent. So where do they then go? Who do they talk to about this? If you ask them also, some may talk to the family, someone may have a friend, but many of them don't even have this. Because again, just like me, as I moved from city to city and country, we perhaps didn't form those close bonds. So just like myself, I kept it inside me. So that is a bit of the research that I looked into. As I mentioned, I also had more than 50 in-depth interviews for the book, and let me just share with you a few of their stories. So here is Jane. It's not her real name, not her real picture, but a lady working in Singapore. She has had a fantastic career in the accounting field, getting from promotion, bigger roles and so on. Now during COVID times, her company are looking after the budgets and they done cuts, and she has been let go. She has now updated a CV, and she sent out the CV to all her connections. She told me close to 50 job interviews. Everyone is very interested in her, but they say we have a recruitment freeze now. We cannot, perhaps we connect next year. But she has 2 of her children in school. She needs to pay for their education, and she's worried she has to pull her children out of the school they go to, and she's worried about the future. And when I spoke with her, she hadn't told anyone about it. She's desperately trying to find a new job. She's feeling extremely lonely. I'm sure if someone of you have lost a job or know someone who lost a job during this time, you can understand what I'm talking about. And then here we have Tony, also not his real name, not his picture, but the real scenario here from Singapore. Tony had left his corporate career and set up a catering business that was growing quite well. And but just when COVID hit also, he didn't have any backup plan. He didn't have the cash flow to support the time that it took a hit. His business went out of business very quickly. He's married, and his wife was not happy that he had taken a jump from his safe job before into setting up his own business. And she now wants a divorce because she's saying, well, I told you so, and they keep having fights, and he doesn't know what to do or who to talk to. He has certainly not asked for any professional help. Then here we have Pasha. Pasha was actually his ex-wife divorced him a few years ago because he was working too much. He then changed to a new job, and he has a new wife, and they are very happy. He's happy with his job, but due to COVID-19, his job is not doing so well, and he's now worried that he's going to be laid off. He is very anxious because he feels that he's coming to the prime or the end of his career, and his previous divorce costed him so much money. He has no money saved up for pension, and he desperately needs this job. He's worried every day that maybe he's going to lose his job. So that's just a few of the people that I spoke with. I have many more stories to share later with you, which I read in my book. And by the way, here's my QR code. Feel free to scan it and connect with me if you want to connect with me offline. I'm just going to take a sip of drink here because it's challenging for me to talk about this. It brings in a lot of emotions having spoken to these people. So then the next topic to address is we need to talk about suicide. And people are reluctant to talk about mental health issues openly, but especially suicide. But we have to come to the point where it's okay to talk about suicide. We have to become comfortable about talking about this, because only if we do that will we start to feel better about it and can address this topic, and which is so sensitive. One question which I'm not going to ask you to answer today, but I've done this a few times and asked a poll, and if I given this keynote live, I typically ask the people in the audience to raise their hand if they know someone who committed suicide. This is a very sensitive topic, and when I'm asking this to you, I'm sure you feel uncomfortable, and that's why I'm not even going to ask it. When I gave this keynote in January in Myanmar and asked this topic, this question, there was about 400 people in the audience, and there was no one that wanted to raise their hand. Just at the back, I eventually saw 3 or 4 people raising their hand. Then when I made a keynote to them online like this, and we had a poll which they could do anonymously, 60% clicked that they knew someone who had committed suicide. The global average is somewhere around 30 to 40%. So it just shows how many people we know, and it's becoming more and more common. Yet we are shy even to talk about it, even to admit or say that we know someone who committed suicide. Therefore, it's very, very challenging to address this issue. And suicides has been also been growing a lot during the COVID-19 times. I personally have had in my network of friends already 2 suicides due to the pressures of COVID-19, one male, one female, and it's very sad every time it happens. Of course, with COVID-19, we have been separated from families and we have been isolated, and we can see that the effects of this is only starting now. We're 6 months into this. Many people can be strong, cope for a few months, but I think if as the months go ahead, we really, really need to be mindful about the people we have around us. Otherwise, it's going to be more suicides, and that is at least what the experts think. And I'm talking also to Over the Rainbow, which is a beautiful charity organization here in Singapore by a gentleman whose son committed suicide. And he's doing everything he can to also remove the stigma around mental health and suicide. And if you ask Yen Lu, he says that we are starting to see an epidemic with people suffering in isolation. It's really a lurking mental health crisis around the corner. And if we don't address it, it's going to just get out of control in the coming years. The next topic I wanted to ask you, and you feel free to comment in the Q&A box if you want. Who's experiencing most loneliness? Is it men or is it women? I also started to look into this topic, and what I read so far and what I found out in my research is that it seems like when it comes to feeling lonely, it seems like the men are feeling more lonely, but the women are more depressed. But when it comes to the suicides, women have more suicide attempts, but men are committing more suicides. That's my small conclusions. So if we are looking at them, it seems like the loneliness men are isolating themselves more. Women tend to have a few good friends that they also speak with openly. Men seems to perhaps show a little bit more of success rather than being vulnerable, which women are perhaps better about. I hear sometimes when my new wife or friends of wives are on the phone to each other, they can talk on for half an hour, 45 minutes about everything. We men seem to not have those kind of relationships. And when it comes into depression, even though the statistics are saying that there's more women that are suffering from it, my take on this is perhaps that the women would be more likely to go and see a doctor and get it diagnosed, while the men would typically lock themselves in and suffer in isolation. And also, as I said, if a woman have a few friends close to them, maybe one of them bring them or even recommend them to go to a doctor, and therefore they get support and help. When it comes to the suicides, yes, there's more suicide attempts documented by women while the men are succeeding. And it seems like it is because the men are more committed into the completion. And it seems like they're using heavier tactics such as guns and so on. While the women, it seems to be more a cry for help, asking for attention, rather than actually committing it, which is the case of many men. Then, before we start to look into how to overcome this, I just wanted to address one issue as well. It's about digital transformation. I was invited last year by the Digital Transformation Forum to talk about if digital transformation is increasing executive isolation. And this was before COVID, and then we sort of were forced to use digital tools to communicate. And I would say it's two sides to this story, of course. But the fact is that we feel better when we are connected with other people, when we have them by our side and we can feel the warmth and so on. There's less miscommunication because we can see the body language. When we keep messaging and writing, we are communicating, writing perhaps more, but there's less understanding at the other end. How many times have you been in a WhatsApp group, for example, where someone written something and the conversation starts to spiral, someone misunderstood it, getting feeling a detention to the point where they exit the group, and then it's becoming a bit of gossip in the group. This is the communication that really is hurting people, and we have to walk around with the pain of having all these fights. And especially now on social media, you have everything from the people in favor of vaccines and against the vaccines, and then you have subgroups and people are fighting, and it's just going out of control in the society at the moment, because we are communicating by digital tools and rather than speaking. And it's also that many of the clubs and so on in societies are falling apart, where we used to have our memberships in the past. We used to go and meet people in person. Instead, now we're spending that time online, surfing and watching different kind of social media. So we're lacking that human touch. So that was what I wanted to share with you today. Now I wanted to go into the most important part of today. So how to then overcome executive loneliness. I put together a few key points and how it worked for me and what helped me in my recovery. How did I come back from this and what saved my life? And I've been reflecting so much about why couldn't we save Simon. So the first thing that helped me when I was lying there in my bed and with my swollen foot and to come back to life was I needed to really look myself in the mirror, and I had to start being honest, and I had to decide to myself to be vulnerable. I was never going to get well unless I told someone. And by luck, by this time I had a new wife. I got married in April 2018, and that probably saved my life. I had nothing more to lose, and I started to be honest with my new wife. I told her what was going on. I explained clearly how I felt. I stopped hiding it. I stopped trying to show how good I was, and I just explained everything that happened. And as I started down this open and honest approach, I started to feel such a relief from my whole body and the shoulders that I just could start to breathe again. I started to wake up more positive in the morning, even though the foot was still swollen and I still was sick. It was just like a switch in my head. And by talking to her, we decided together that I was going to get more help. I started to ask for help. I went to see doctors, therapists, and psychologists, everything. I started to read educational books again, expert advice. I had to address it from every single angle. I got a fitness coach who gave me a training plan, and it started very softly by just a 5-kilometer walk per day. I tracked it with the devices we now have. We have where we can even track how much we sleep, and I bought the scale and really put down some clear targets for me to get much better and feeling well. I also had to address the issue of alcohol because for a few months there, I had really been drinking too much and it was becoming a problem for me. And since I had to be honest and open up, I asked where can I get help for this? And there's a beautiful organization, a volunteer organization called AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, where I went, and there was other people who also had misfortunes and had been drinking too much. I learned a lot from this organization to be around like-minded who also have had issues with alcohol. I am so pleased to say that since I went into my meeting there on May 5, 2018, I've not had any alcohol. That's done wonders for me. I sleep much better because of this. And the next thing I addressed was relationships. When it comes to the personal network, I started to cycle, join some running clubs and so on to really form some strong personal relationships in Singapore with some good friends, both Singaporeans and expats. The next thing was for me to have the professional network, and I had it, of course, right in front of me with EGN, but organization like this with SICC is beautiful, and there you have your chance to form professional network to talk about your work-related challenges. And what I've found is that if I'm the one to open up to someone over lunch or coffee, to be honest, the other person will appreciate it, and they will also decide to open up and be honest with you. The fact is that we tend to just be so close and talk about the successes rather than the challenges. And why do we talk about successes? We already know that. It's useless to talk about it. If we instead always decide in every conversation we have with someone, say something that you need help with, and the person will be so happy to help you. So have that professional network to help you is a beautiful thing, and that really helped me. The next thing I had to do, and this was thanks to the AA program, which I went through, where I learned how to apologize and make amends. It's one of the 12 steps in the AA program, where you actually reach out to all the people you have harmed in your past life. You go back even from your childhood. The first thing you just write a long list of all these people, and you have to apologize to them. And to try to make things right. And I did my best to apologize to families, to my family sisters, and also to my ex-wife, and keep doing to my son. And then doing this at living amends every day, take some stock and check at the end of the day, did I do the right thing today? Did I harm someone? If you did something, if you snapped at someone, you sent an angry email, do apologize before you go to bed each day so you can then sleep well. You wake up the next day and you will see how positive you are. That is something that I will learn, that I will bring with me for the rest of my life, to always say sorry if I hurt someone on an ongoing basis. The next thing I was looking at was finding my purpose. Perhaps my purpose was what I did here when I started the campaign, and that's why I'm speaking with you today and why I'm writing a book on this topic. I'm really passionate about sharing this message, because if we can save one life by doing this, then it's already been worth my time. I do this full of passion, and I do it just to be able to be of service. And that is also what is so important. I learned through the AA program also that you need to be of service. And that is something that I'm doing with the Samaritans, with a suicide agency, where we keep being a volunteer and keep helping to spread a message about suicide hotline. And then just one more thing, and this was identified by my therapist, was to have a plan B, especially perhaps today if you feel that you have a job that you're not so sure about, and it's hard to predict where the future is. And I didn't really have a plan B. I was on an EP, which means that if I lose my job in Singapore, I had to leave rather quickly. I changed that to a PEP, which means I can stay a bit longer, I have 6 months if I lose a job. That made me feel a bit better. I also now studied to become an ICF certified coach. So I have a plan B career. I'm starting to build all these plan B careers now in my own pace, so that I have something to stand on should something happen to me. So I don't find myself in those situations again, where it was in Vietnam, Jakarta, also, where it was like someone ripped the carpet under me, and I was so exposed and I didn't have anything. Then the final thing, as I touched on, is being of service and giving it all back and helping other people. Get outside of my own head really helped me to overcome, because if the more time I spent inside my head when I was not feeling good, the worse things went. So those were my tips. I'm just going to show 2 more pictures with you before I end today and we start the Q&A. So here is a picture of me at the finish line in Ironman Sweden. It was August last year, 2019. So just over a year after my breakdown, my collapse, I managed to go over this amazing finish line in a full distance Ironman event. So it just shows that by speaking up, getting some help and setting some goals, we as humans are amazing how we can progress, how quickly we can recover by getting the right support around us. And why don't we do this more often? Why do we have to be so close as human beings rather than being vulnerable? And the last picture is of my son. He is 11 years old. He's in Sweden now. He was supposed to come here in April this year. Of course, due to COVID, he couldn't come. He was very sad. I was sad. We said, well, we meet each other in August anyway. I will come back to Sweden then. I haven't gone yet to that trip. I keep delaying it and postponing it due to, of course, the travel restrictions and so on. So from time to time, I really have fallen back into my bad old habits and feeling resentful towards government for making restrictions and so on, and feeling frustrated with having to spend 2 weeks quarantine if I'm traveling. All these things are piling up and the anger is building inside me, and I just feel completely helpless. And then when I was working on my book now, I came over the chapter where it says ask for help, and I reminded myself, Nick, ask for help. And that's what I did, because in one of the pages in the book is where I'm listing all the people who helped me during my recovery journey. And one of them was a family therapist who helped me before when I was going to make my amends to my son. So how do you say sorry to a child and so on? And I quickly then made an appointment with her, and she helped me because it was very difficult for me to speak with an 11-year-old boy on Skype. The conversation was so quiet. I didn't really know how to talk to him, how to get information from him. And she really helped me to set the foundation for having good conversations with him online. One thing she asked me was to interview my son, what he really loves, what's the best gift he ever received in his life, and so on. And I quickly identified that he loves his computer and he loves to play online gaming. So what I did then was I bought his favorite online game, and we now spend a few hours every weekend where we're playing the online game together. I also sent him a webcam and a headset so we can see each other and we can play together. It's amazing how this works, because I'm now in his world, and during the week he's building things inside the world, and when we are together, he's walking me through the world, showing me what he has done during the week, what his friends are done, and so on. And I'm really coming to know him as a person, because we are playing on his terms, which is rather than me calling him and asking, how was your week? What are you doing? How's the weather? All those questions, which leads to nothing. But inside the game, whenever we are 1 hour inside playing, suddenly he starts telling me all kind of things about himself, which I never would have found out otherwise. So again, it is possible to get help. It's possible to feel well. There's so many people out there, experts or friends, that can help us, but it's only possible if we do ask for help. So that was everything I wanted to share with you today, and I hope you learned something, because if you are suffering, or if there's someone suffering close to you or around you, just supporting them and speaking up is the first step. Thank you.
Nick, thank you so much. If this was a live event, you'd have a standing ovation at this point. Because what shone through your presentation to us this morning is not only your authenticity, but you've underscored so many of the issues that everybody faces and often doesn't talk about or don't talk about. And you've also underscored that all of us need each other. We need each other as friends, we need each other as family members, we need each other as business people. And these topics, you know, we couldn't have had a better speaker on World Suicide Prevention Day, which is what the 10th of September is. So thank you very much for being here. I really like the authenticity and admire your courage for being so open in a city that often focuses on the peripherals and the ephemeral issues of materialism without realizing what goes to achieve all that. And as you've discovered in your life and your friend who sadly committed suicide, there is a very high price when we don't listen to our brains and our bodies when we aren't feeling right or we're not feeling well. So thank you so much, really great. A couple of questions from me before we look at the questions in the Q&A box. One of the things that came through your recovery was, you know, finding that purpose and having a passion for what you do. And often in my own career, when I was in financial services, often I was locked into a high-paying job, which I absolutely hated. I hated my boss because he was toxic and absolutely impossible to work with. I hated some of the customers. I hated everything about it, but I felt trapped. I felt trapped because the money was great and I had all sorts of financial commitments and I had a very nice lifestyle, thank you very much, that I'd become accustomed to. And in the end, I simply walked away from that, because if I hadn't have walked away, it would have killed me. And it's so often the case that the price we pay for what we think of as success, in fact, is a mirage. It's not success at all. We are, in effect, killing ourselves, and we either do it, you know, we either commit suicide, or we get into substance abuse, or we behave badly to the people that we care about and love. So it just struck me so powerfully that one of the things that can help put you on the right track is to get that passion for something, because it sort of helps put all these other things into perspective. Would you agree?
Yes, certainly, Victor. And finding that passion, it wasn't so easy for me during this time. It took my friend, sadly, it took my friend to commit suicide for me to find it. But sometimes also, we need such a strong wake-up call. It can be a parent that is passing away or a family member, and then we start to jump on that course. How many times have we seen someone who's doing charities or rallies or something, whether it's something you have been affected personally? It seems like we need to have something so firmly, something that really strikes you so hard in order to take firm action. And that is what I think is the challenging part here. But in this case, indeed, this led me to my passion, and I'm step by step going down this journey the whole time. As I mentioned, my passion, I became very passionate about this. As soon as I had made that first post, I didn't know what this would lead me to. At that time, it was just I wanted to help the family. I thought, let's just do something, one event, and it should supposed to be an ad hoc event. But then suddenly now I'm writing a book about it, which I wouldn't do unless I'm overly passionate about it. And it's helping me by helping others. So every day, and thanks for the invitation today, I'm feeling great just speaking about this, because I see already someone is saying thank you here in the Q&A box. And it's wonderful to be of service and helping each other. And that is what I'm passionate about now, Victor.
Yeah, I can tell, and it's great. Now, we all know, and you will know this because you run a professional network of senior executives, you will know, as I know, that there's a lot of toxicity in workplaces in Singapore and elsewhere. We're not immune, but there does seem to be an awful lot of it. What do you think businesses should be doing, and starting with business leaders, to help themselves, help their teams, and therefore help their businesses when it comes to mental health issues?
I think they need to be vulnerable, and that's why I said it's lonely at the top, and I was talking about senior executives, because somehow in an organization, if the CEO or the top of the organization is not willing to be open herself or himself, then how could you expect someone in the middle of the organization speaking up? They will be scared. And we live in a world where social media is playing such an important role. And here social media can help us. That's where I decided to open up by a LinkedIn post by making a video. And I couldn't believe it received almost 40,000 views and hundreds of comments and so on. But that really opened up everything for me. And I now have a podcast. And by the way, if there's someone who's interested in being on my podcast on this topic, feel free to contact me afterwards. I just interviewed one lady who's a managing director for one of the big banks in Singapore, and she's in her 50s now, and she have never in her career dared to be vulnerable, but she was inspired by my talk, and she said, yes, I go on your talk show, Nick. And I spoke with her about vulnerability, and she spoke for 19 minutes, and then she shared this with her whole bank. And everyone now, they keep talking about it for weeks afterwards. It just changed the culture overnight, like a switch. Wow, she's talking about this. Now all the team members, and they have, during this lockdown period also, they have some Skype meetings, and they start sharing. They're having these sessions together, social sessions, where they're openly sharing what's going on. So you can really change that culture in just one message, one address by the CEO to the organization by sharing something personal.
Yeah, you see, this underscores the point that we in the chamber make all the time, that it may be lonely at the top, but it is the leader's job to set the tone for that organization. Yes. It is the leader's job to work with his colleagues, his teams, to build and sustain a positive workplace culture. And part of that is making sure that people's mental health gets just as much attention in a positive sense as their physical well-being, because it just makes commercial sense to do so. And I think we are beginning to see, thanks to the pandemic, it's one of the silver linings, we're beginning to see more leaders focusing on their own mental health, and therefore, like that lady MD from financial services, which is a particularly toxic environment, believe you me, it can be very toxic, it's good to see. That's very encouraging. So let's go to the Q&A box, and of course it's no surprise that the very first person who asked a question was John Bittleston, and he did so at 1 minute past 10. So here you are, John, thank you. How do you know when the signs of stress from whatever cause are approaching a critical level? Are there any key questions, the answers to which will give you the warning signs that you've got to take seriously?
Fantastic question, John. And I think we need to look at this from a few angles also, because how do you see it, for example, in yourself, and how do you see it in other people? But one typical sign is that you suddenly see, let's say that one of your colleagues or friends or your husband or wife suddenly are changing their habits. Let's say that someone is a mother and she's very passionate about the baby. Suddenly you see that she's not passionate about the baby. She doesn't want to even spend time with the baby. She lost the feeling, the love for motherhood. That's obviously a very strong sign. Another would be like what happened in my case. I had exercised for many years. Suddenly I didn't have any mood for walking, running, cycling. I just changed my habit. I go to the bar instead. That was just a complete switch overnight. Other signs, of course, is if you cannot sleep, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, that we can ask that for ourselves. And if something is bothering us, that because we wake up 3 o'clock at night, we're thinking about things. Those things that you wake up thinking about, you have to have a pen and paper by you by the bed and write them down and deal with them. Catch that moment in yourself. What is it that make you wake up? Address that. Is it a conflict with a person? Is it that your boss have given you too firm KPIs? Or what is it? Whatever that is, take that, and it's linked to also perhaps you've done some harm to someone, and perhaps it's all you need is an apology. And many times those apologies, it's only to get it off your chest. It doesn't matter if they accept it or not. You cleaned your side of the street. So those are a few things that at least I can think of. But I can certainly say also, if someone is extremely rude to you and very snappy at you, especially on WhatsApp, they are probably in an extremely stressed place. And the key is for us then not to take that personal, give them some space and try to arrange perhaps to see them for a coffee and or a lunch. Don't let the conversation online start going sour. Just deal with it. Try to see them face to face, and it will be sorting itself out.
Yeah, thank you. I look at the Q&A box with some disappointment. I'm delighted to see so many people saying nice things about your sharing, but I would really like to encourage the audience to have the courage and help us all by putting in some questions. Otherwise, you're going to have to listen to me for the next 15 minutes, which I don't necessarily recommend on always. But let's see if we can get some more questions from the audience. And meanwhile, let's just go back to that issue you raised during your presentation about the difference between men and women, and how so often, you know, we all know relatives who've had physical health challenges and they just keep putting it off. It's a very male thing to do, that you don't even want to admit to yourself, and you don't want to tell your loved ones, and you certainly don't want to go and see a doctor. What is it about men that really they put themselves into such boxes and such a disadvantage? Why do we men find it so hard to open up and be vulnerable, as you would say?
That's a great question, Victor. And I was giving my keynote a few weeks ago to an organization in Australia called Mentoring Men. The most are men in the 50s in Australia, rural areas who don't have any people around to speak to. So they set up during lockdowns some Zoom calls when they were talking about this topic. And when we asked them, why are we not? It's just that we are told as men or boys already, starting as boys, we are told not to cry. It's you know, we're just told to show that we are strong, we are firm, and that is something that if you recall from my talk, when I lost my job, I didn't want to admit it to anyone. I didn't want to tell, especially my parents, because they were the ones who raised me to be achieving and being successful, which I have been in my career. But have I felt great and been feeling you know, good internally behind the scenes? Probably not. And that is so many of us, especially men, then that are just trying to always show how good we are. But as soon as you open that and you have one open conversation with a man, what I found is that they in return will open up. And that is, of course, something that I've seen in the AA community where I'm a part of now. And there's 10 different groups in that in Singapore alone. And there is the culture that you speak openly and honestly. And it's such a wonderful feeling when you walked out from one of those meetings and you just have had an honest conversation. But we don't have to go to such a meeting. If you have a friend and go for lunch or coffee, just decide to before or share something openly and honestly, and you will be surprised that they will open up too.
No, I agree, and I've certainly found that to be the case. I think if we all were a lot more open and honest with ourselves and each other, not only would the world be a better place, our businesses would be in better shape as well. Good. We've got a couple of questions. Hooray. Okay, so let's take Daniel's question. Daniel says, Nick, thank you for sharing your experiences openly. People generally need to be pushed into breaking out of their comfort zone. I like your plan B idea. What do you think of doing good and giving back to the community? Well, I mean,
yes.
You really answered that in your presentation, didn't you?
Yeah, so it's played a big part of my role. And I remember I used to, as a student, work for a charity in Australia called the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I was a volunteer for them, and I organized together with the team and golf tournaments where we raised money for charity. And then for 15 years, I was in the rat race and I forgot all about community service. It was all about me getting promotions, trying to earn the money. And it was when I had crashed, and again, to link back to AA, where I found the concept of giving it all back and being of service. And I learned that it's not only inside that organization, but even outside. So for the Samaritans, the SOS hotline, which I'm now a volunteer for, and it's highly rewarding to be a volunteer. And my job is to spread the message as much as I can for people to call the hotline. And even in the book I'm writing, one page will be the various organizations that you can reach out to and asking for help. So yeah, being of service is something that I do. And also in the AA program, even though I have not had a drink for over 2 years now, I'm a volunteer about 5 mornings a week, including this morning. I was up 5 a.m. where I come to the meeting, and I'm at the same place in Singapore most mornings, 5, 6 a.m. in the morning, where people can come who have problems. And I'm one of the people who are there to have a coffee, just to listen and talk to somebody if they have a challenging time. Because during this lockdown period, people perhaps are separated. There's one case with the one executive where the wife is now in another country, and he was lonely here, and he's been drinking too much, and he had a problem with this. And I'm there to keep giving back as many days of the week I can by sharing over a coffee how I came out of it, because it helps me to help someone else.
Yes, and I think often when we either survive a life-changing event, or when we are honest with ourselves, and I think you talked about this in your presentation too, that often you can get just too self-centered, and you need to take yourself out of yourself, because it puts a lot of what you're going through into perspective. Because however bad it is for each one of us, there are many other people who are going through much worse things. I think that is something we always need to remember. Sally says, totally agree. How can companies or leaders inculcate positive mental health as part of their values or culture at work?
Yeah, so I think a bit linked to what I said there, that it starts with the leader. And I'm giving this talk to quite a few companies now in the coming weeks here. And I give a little bit condensed version, a shorter version. And then I'm encouraging also the boss, the CEO, to also share their story after mine, because then you can have a great conversation after that. Maybe everyone is not ready right away. Perhaps they are a bit shocked. They need to absorb it. But once they have a follow-up session, perhaps the next Friday or whatever, they can have an event or a social gathering and see groups of 5 go out for lunches with the team, and they can reflect and share something else that they felt. So that culture really comes, I think, from from the leader himself to set that culture. As you rightly said, Victor, it's really hard for someone lower also to change it. If it's a toxic CEO, you will have a toxic culture in the organization. And then if you find yourself in that organization as an employee, and you've spoken with the boss and they are toxic, then probably finding that plan B might be good behind the scene, because you're going to be miserable in the end if you cannot change it.
Yeah, I completely agree, because sometimes you can't change things and you have to vote with your feet. And I certainly find that in my life. Kathy has said, fantastic, Nick, thank you. How do you find the time, given the realities of being in Singapore for the job, in capital letters, and this commitment, so to speak, for things that may seem extra, like building personal friendships, finding passions, and connecting? Great question, because I think, Kathy, you put the spotlight on exactly what the problem is. Wouldn't you agree, Nick?
Yes. So the time then, I can say like this. My son is, as I said, in Sweden now. So I don't have 2-3 hours a day, which I would spend as a father, which I'm very sad about, but it is what it is. So I decide to spend that time instead of doing community service if I can most days. So that's how I support back. But when it comes also then to the friendships, I combining it with exercise. So I found that you can join cycling club, running clubs, walking clubs, and you have anything from Internations running club. They meet on Wednesday nights for a run. There's so many organizations you can join where you can actually exercise together. I belong to probably around 5-6 cycling clubs here, and even though the rule of 5 applies now, I force myself to try to come to each club and from time to time to connect with the people. So that is how I start typically the morning, by cycling and doing some community service, being there for some people. And I started then the day by being of service, get outside of my head, giving something back to the community. I have exercise. What a great start, and what a positive start of the day, and doing something I'm then passionate about, and connecting people as well. And as I mentioned, I'm passionate also about giving advice. I had one executive yesterday who had been crashing in his role, and he asked for advice, and I passed on a few contacts to some counselors and so on. This person had never seen a counselor, and he was so shy asking about it. Said, just try it out. It can't be worse than going to the dentist. So just go for it.
Yeah, and I think the issue is that we all, particularly when we've got busy jobs, we all can convince ourselves quite readily that we haven't got time for anything except the job. But in actual fact, we can make time for all the things we're passionate about, and that should be loved ones and family. Doing that extra bit for our friends, or in your case, you talk very cogently about giving back to society in ways that you're hitting a number of birds with a number of stones. So you're keeping fit, but you're still being of help to somebody who's maybe going through a tough path. And I think that is the answer. The answer is that we can all make time for what we really want to do. It's a question of what are we passionate about and what are we prepared to do.
Can I add one thing there, Victor? And because I completely agree. And I should say, yeah, so when it comes to the cycling part, I even set up one WhatsApp group where we are some fellows also, where everyone have gone through a challenging time. And I'm cycling with this group a few times a week, where we then have a chat. Of course, in groups of less than 5, but we have a chat and then end with a coffee. So you can indeed combine these things, and you have to cut out some things. I don't have time to watch the news. I don't have CNN on in the evening. I'm in bed by that time, which is probably a good thing today. So you have to prioritize and do the things that are leading to good mental health.
Absolutely. The questions seem to have dried up, but Patrick has asked a question to SICC, which is, would SICC consider to have a kind of AA equivalent as a value add or a CSR to members? Patrick, you'll have to drop me a line to victor@sicc.com.sg, because I don't understand that. But you tell us what you want and we'll see what we can do. Nick, this has been great. It's been great to finally meet you. It's been great to have you here with our members. Thank you so much once again for being so authentic, so open, and for putting a lot of issues in a proper context for us. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Let me hear what you want and need. There you are, here to help at sicc.com.sg. I'm particularly keen to know what you think of Nobi, whether you think it's great or not. And on behalf of Nick, on behalf of all my team, it's goodbye, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Nick.
Bye.